Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn the Rashis and Masechta Shabbos on Daf Tesamid Beis. Let's begin. So the Mishnah said, "Lo yeshiv adam lefnei asaper." A person may not sit in front of the barber. Says Rashi, "Lehistaper," to take a haircut. Person's not allowed to do this. Samoch lemincha, close to the time of mincha. So Rashi explains this is koidim lemincha. Close to the time of mincha means before mincha. Achi spalal, a person's not allowed to do this until he davens. And the reason is, says Rashi, Shemeyishkach v'lo yispalal, maybe he will forget and not daven. V'ho afilu b'chol nami, and this is even during the week. This teaching is not specifically on Erev Shabbos, although here we're in Masechta Shabbos, and we're going to be speaking about dinim from here on about Erev Shabbos. This din is not specific to Erev Shabbos, it's actually related to Tfilas Mincha throughout the whole week. And this that it teaches it here in Masechta Shabbos, Mishum de Dami Loha de Tani Gaba, is because it's similar to this that it teaches nearby, because it's similar to the next Mishnah, which says Lo Yetze Hachayit B'Machtei Erev Shabbos Im Chashecha. A tailor may not go out with his needle on Erev Shabbos close to nightfall. Shemeyishkach v'Yetze Mishetechshach. For maybe he'll forget and go out after it becomes dark. So since the next Mishnah speaks of a similar type of teaching, therefore this Mishnah is inserted here in Masechta Shabbos. So we said a person's not allowed to do this, and there's a number of other things a person's not allowed to do before the time of Mincha. V'lo yikonis, and one may not enter. The Mishnah doesn't say Samach l'Mincha. So Rashi explains it's also Samach l'Mincha, close to Mincha. Loyla merchat schula, not to a bathhouse, not to a tannery, not to a meal, and not to a din Torah. Says Rashi, "V'taima de kulu mishum shema yimoshech ad sheyaver zman tefillah," and the reason of all of them is because maybe he will continue till it passes the time of mincha. So all five of these activities are prohibited because we're concerned that a person may forget to daven tefillas mincha. Ve'im hischilu, and if one started, a person wasn't allowed to start. If a person, however, did start, achas mikol elu, one of all these things, one of these five activities, ein mafsikin, he doesn't have to stop. Ella, rather, yigmor va'achakach mispalal. He should end and daven afterwards. It doesn't mean he doesn't have to stop and he can continue and miss tefillas mincha. Rather, what it means is that we're going to permit him to continue and let him daven afterwards. Uvigmar mefarish b'deika shos ligmor koidim sheyaver azman. And in the Gemara it explains it's when there's time to finish before the time of mincha passes. Only then do we say the person can continue. So we're not permitting him to miss mincha. Rather, what we're saying is that if there's still be enough time afterwards, we're not going to worry that he'll forget. The Mishnah concluded and said, "Mafsikin likrishma." One has to stop to say krishma, and the reason by krishma that a person does have to stop is the isa mederaisa for its minatera. And the last part of the Mishnah said, "Ve'ein mafsikin litfila," and does not have to stop for tefillah. One doesn't have to stop any of these five activities for tefillah. And Rashi points out, "Uvegmara parach hatana le'reisha," and in the Gemara he asks, but it says it in the Reisha. This teaching that for tefillah, a person doesn't have to stop the activity that he began. We already said it earlier in the beginning of the Mishnah. Why is it repeated over here? Now we'll move on to the Rashis on the Gemara. So the Gemara, we mentioned the Mincha G'dayla and the Mincha Ktana. So Rashi will explain what they are. Mincha G'dayla is Haschalas. Rashi explains Haschalas man tomad shabein arbaim michi matchil ha'arev. Mincha corresponds to the second korban tomid, which is a korban tomid shabein arbaim that was brought every day in the Beis Hamikdash. So it says Rashi that the beginning of the time of the korban tamid of Bein Arbaim is from when it begins to become the evening. In other words, when the second half of the day starts. When the first half of the day, it's still close to the morning, and then when the sun starts setting towards the west, it's already beginning to become the evening. The Hainu Mechatzi Shevel Amayla, which is from half of the seventh hour and onwards, which basically is 6.5 hours into the day. So now Rashi will explain why is it 6.5 hours into the day and not exactly 6 hours. Once it's 6 hours into the day, the sun now is beginning to set in the west. The hochatzi sheish v'chatzi sheva chamo imedes b'reish kol adam v'kederes keneg delamata, because half of the 6th hour and half of the 7th, the sun stands on the head of all people and shines opposite it downwards. Between 5.5 hours in the day and 6.5 hours into the day, the sun is directly above our heads, so it hasn't yet begun to set in the west. So therefore, we say that it only begins to set 6.5 hours into the day. And between 5.5 and 6.5, ve'ena noita l'shum tzad, and it doesn't tilt to any side. And from half of the 7th hour, which means 6.5 hours into the day, and from half of the 7th hour and onwards, it tilts in the heaven to the west, and that's why it's considered the start of the time of bringing the korban tamid of the afternoon. Now we said that a person is not allowed to begin any of these activities close to the time of mincha. And Rashi said that means before the time of mincha. How much time before? So Rashi says that here, samuch lemincha ma'ascholas sheva. Close to mincha is from the start of the 7th hour. In other words, 6 hours into the day, and now we're beginning the 7th hour. So the time of the carbon tamid is 6.5 hours into the day, which is the start of the time of mincha gdela. A half an hour before that, which is 6 hours into the day, is when a person has to abstain from these activities until he first davens. Now Rashi will tell us about mincha ktana. Mincha ktana b'tesu mechza. It's by 9.5 hours. That's when mincha ktana begins, and the reason is shaha yirigilim shalela achrei yosem yikein kedamrinu v'tamid nishchat. For they were accustomed not to delay it more than this, like we said in tamid nishchat. Although the carbon tamid could be brought the whole second half of the day, the way it was done in the Beis Hamikdash is that they typically brought it at 8.5 hours into the day, and it took a complete hour, so it extended till 9.5 hours into the day. And the reason is they didn't want to push it off and end up making it later than its proper time, and therefore the time allotted for the carbon tamid was from 8.5 hours to 9.5 hours into the day, and therefore mincha gdela is from 6.5 hours to 9.5 hours into the day, and after that is mincha ktana. Now, what's considered close to mincha ktana? Mincha ktana is 9.5 hours into the day. Samach lametchilas, close to it is from the start of the 10th hour. That means 9 hours into the day, right as the 10th hour is beginning. So, if mincha ktana is 9.5 hours into the day, close to it is 9 hours into the day. Now, the Gemara had a question. If one began, he doesn't have to stop. We said our Mishnah seems to be referring to mincha ktana. That means a person is not allowed to do any of these 5 activities from 9 hours into the day. However, we said if he started, he doesn't have to stop. So the Gemara question, if he started, he doesn't have to stop. Bitmiya, it's a wonder, it's a question. V'yavar azman, and the time will pass. Lema tehevet yuftachulu. Let us say this is a question, etc. on Rabbi Shua ben Levi. For here it says they may end their meal. In our Mishnah it says that a person is allowed to continue his meal, and even though the time when it's usher is passing, it's fine. We're going to allow him to continue his meal and daven afterwards. That would be a question of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, who said that a person is not allowed to continue the meal. So the Gemara answered that actually Rabbi Shua ben Levi is referring to mincha ktana, and that's very late in the day, and therefore, if a person started, we will obligate him to stop. Our Mishnah is actually referring to the time of mincha gedela, when there's much time left in the day, and therefore, if he began, we will not obligate him to stop. Now, we needed to answer if that's the case, that we're referring to mincha gedela. Why would it be us to do these 5 activities so early in the day? There's still much time left for tefillas mincha. Why are we concerned that a person might forget? So we explained the 2 answers. One is that the activities in our Mishnah are referring to when they take a very long time. And the next one is that we're concerned that they could end up taking a long time, although they're not on their own, they weren't long activities, but they could turn into long activities. So Rashi is going to go through right now the cases of when we said that they're referring to activities that do take a long time. So he said the haircut is a haircut of Ben Elisha. Rashi explains, Chasani shel Rebbe Haya. He was a son-in-law of Rebbe. And he spent a lot of money to learn the haircut of the Kohen Gadol. For he would get a haircut for his whole head, but not entirely. He wouldn't shave completely. Rather, he would leave a little of all the hair, in order that the head of one would be there by the root of the other. So that's how the haircut was done. Which is in Yecheskel. And this is what it says, which Mefarshim basically over there explain. It's referring to this haircut of the Kohen Gadol, where the end of one hair, where the top of one hair, the head of one hair, touch the root of the other. Umimshech tuvan, it takes a long time, and that's the haircut that's prohibited to do close to the time of mincha gdela, because that haircut takes a very long time. We said a tannery that a person can't use is referring to borsiki gdela, a large tannery. Iris harbe ubetchilas tikunim, and there are many hides, and at the beginning of their being processed, and therefore, even though it's so early in the day, it could still lead that a person may forget mincha because it's a long process. Look, and when we said that a person can't enter the bathhouse, the Gemara explained it's the kula melsa the merchatz. It's for the whole process of bathing. Lachuf reishay. This is that he needs to wash his head. Ulishtatev bechamen uvetzeinen, and he has to wash himself with hot waters and cold waters. Ula hazia, and to sweat. And since that could take a very long time, therefore it's usher even so early on in the day. And so that was all the first answer, explaining how these activities are referring to long activities. And then we brought the answer of Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, who said that it's referring to regular activities, but they're still prohibited because we're concerned that they could end up taking a long time. What would occur that could end up leading that they should take a long time? So we went through them. We said by a haircut, we're concerned Shema Yishaver Hazug. Maybe the scissor will break. shel misparayim v'yei tzarich l'chazer acher zug acher. Of the scissors, the metal part of the scissors will break, and he will need to look for another scissors, and that could take a long time to replace. And therefore, we're concerned that a person may miss mincha. A person can enter lemerchutz and not to the bathhouse. Nami loytema lekol milsa de merchutz. Also, don't say it's to the whole process of the bathhouse. Even if a person is not going for the whole process, it's still prohibited to do it. Elalazia ba'alma, rather only to sweat. Now, why would it be prohibited so early in the day? We said because shema yis alpha, maybe you'll become faint. And Rashi brings down the word in Old French. And then we went to the tannery and said when it said a person can't go to a tannery, it's not just if he has a lot of hides and it's the beginning of the process, but rather even liyuna ba'alma, only to inspect. She'ein zet chilas asiyasa, that this isn't the beginning of its making. It's not the beginning of the process. Va'afilu hachi lechatchila le'yikanes lo. And nevertheless, originally one may not enter Samach l'mincha gdela, close to mincha gdela. He should not enter it close to the time of mincha gdela. And the reason is, dilmo chazib pseida bezvinin, maybe you'll see a loss in his merchandise. Shemen iskalkukulu b'seicha eris, maybe the hides got ruined in it. He's coming to inspect and there was a loss that he incurred. Umatr, then he'll become occupied. Says Rashi, yitztar v'heitorid b'tzairi. He'll be pained and he'll be occupied with his pain. V'lo yispal, and he won't daven. And we said also a person can't go to a dintera. It's referring to even the end of the dintera. Now, why would it be permitted? There's very little left to the process because we're concerned maybe new information will come up. V'sas rudina, and overturn the ruling. They're going to overturn the ruling that they made. And then the dintera could extend for a much more lengthy amount of time. Yisasru mashe pasku, they will overturn what they ruled. V'yachzru behen, and go back on what they said. V'chayzer li yeis tchilas adin. And then it returns to be the beginning of the judgment. So now it's a whole new din Torah, which could take a very long amount of time.